well. She is a pediatric nephrologist who has done her fellowship from Gangaram Hospital and then has done, I think, IPNA fellowship in pediatric from Singapore also. She is a good doctor, everybody knows, and a good person also. So we are expecting a good webinar today. So over to Neha. Please, Neha, start with the webinar.
Thank you, sir. I hope I live to your expectations. So before starting this webinar, it is more like an interactive session for all of us, because I think in all our OPDs we do encounter children coming with protein, which may be in urine routine. We always see 1+ in dipstick, or 2+, or maybe more than that. 3+ we never miss it, but 1+, 2+ we sometimes tend to ignore it. Sometimes we really don't know what to do, and sometimes we feel that it is transient proteinuria, so it will just go off. So this talk is mainly, what I'm concerned today is to make all of us realize the importance of proteinuria, to know the causes of proteinuria, to investigate the proteinuria, and to back up with a adequate history and examination. Why is it important to know about proteinuria? Because this proteinuria is actually very significant uh, sign of a underlying chronic disease. So KDIGO, actually the Kidney Disease Initiative Organization, in 2012, they came up with the idea that albuminuria, which is a part of proteinuria only, actually if it persists for more than 3 months, protein is there in the urine, then already it is a marker for chronic kidney disease onset in a child or an adult. So this, the single word implies that proteinuria is very, very important, and we should really look out for it, because there may be an underlying kidney disease which has not been diagnosed till now. So coming on to proteinuria, it is important, but over and under investigation is also very important. So when I started, proteinuria may be transient. So transient proteinuria, any child who has come to you with some kind of fever, cough, cold, may have proteinuria, and it may be just transient. Within a week, you would find that it will go off when you repeat routine, and actually you don't need to worry about it. But we would still suggest to do a urine protein or urine dipstick after 6 months or so. Just be sure that there is no proteinuria. Then the kind of proteinuria, which is persistent proteinuria. There's one more entity which is orthostatic proteinuria. I would be just coming to orthostatic proteinuria a while later, because in any child with proteinuria, we really need to rule out orthostatic proteinuria also before we just investigate and to be a persistent proteinuria. So now, when we'll be doing this step by step. Transient, we have already spoken about. Orthostatic and persistent proteinuria will just come in a while. But before that, what is proteinuria? So urine routine analysis or urine dipstick, whenever we get proteinuria, how much is it significant? That is very important. So whenever we get a urine report, it always says 1+ or 2+. So what is the implication of that 1+, 2+? We'll just come on that a while later. But any child whose 24 hours urine has more than 150 milligram of protein, that is significant. That is 4 milligram per meter square per hour. There are a lot of ways of saying it. But any child with more than 150 milligram protein in 24-hour urine, if it is more than that, it is definitely significant. If we say about the incidence, in 8 to 15 years of age, the documented incidence of proteinuria in children is around 10%. This is the normal values that I have given. So where it is important to know what is significant. So it is more than 150 milligram. If we just say it is between 4 to 40 milligram per meter square per hour, that is moderate proteinuria, which needs to be investigated. Nephrotic range, more than 40 milligram per meter square per hour, which no one misses. So that is 3+ proteinuria. So how 1+, 2+ we signify? We'll just come when we go to the investigations. So transient proteinuria, I've already spoken. If there is any stress, there may be some protein in urine. If the child has not been eating well, if the child has been dehydrated, there may be some amount of ketone, some amount of protein which may be there in the urine, and we don't need to get worried about it. So always rule out if there is any illness. If the child is on any drug, please do repeat the urine protein or urine dipstick before going for further investigation. So even if the child exercises a lot, then also you would find athletes do have protein in the urine because they are exercising, a lot of muscle breakdown is there. So now coming on to a small bit about pathophysiology, it's just very clinical thing that I'll be dealing with. Why there is no protein in the urine? When the urine has some sodium, potassium, all kind of salts, and a lot of things are there. Why there is no protein? Because our glomerulus functions very well. There is restriction of filtration, that is the protein gets completely absorbed. So it doesn't filter out. Not more than 150 milligram of protein that comes out. And that protein, that 150 milligram is coming out, is damn has full protein, which is from the tubules that's coming out. So what are the main mechanisms? Like how do we say that the protein is coming out? So when we talk about the kidney, as our basic anatomy goes, kidney has cortex and medulla. So cortex has glomerulus, which is the main filtration part. It has tubules. So it gets filtered from the proximal convoluted tubule to distal convoluted tubule. So all the protein gets absorbed in these areas. Supposing if there is a damage to the glomerulus, that is there is filtration is defective, there is injury to the podocytes, there is loss of negative charge of the glomerulus, all these results in increased filtration through the glomerulus, and the protein doesn't get absorbed, it gets filtered out. Then another mechanism is through tubules. So proximal convoluted tubule is the most important absorbing part of the tubules. Like in case of renal tubular acidosis, we see that the tubules cannot absorb the proteins. They cannot, if there is a defect in the PCP, will not be able to absorb the proteins, will not be able to absorb the other things like phosphates, potassium, and that is why there is tubular leakage of protein. What tubular leakage of protein, if it is very significant in cases of RTAs or in syndromics like Low's, Dens disease, but otherwise there is TAM-Hasfel protein which comes out from tubule, but it is in a very less amount. It is less than 150 milligram per day. Now coming on to the third mechanism, which is an overflow proteinuria. So what is overflow proteinuria? Supposing if the protein is being made very high amount, like in multiple myeloma, we see there is Benz-Jones protein that keeps coming out because there's so much protein, it doesn't get it doesn't get absorbed, it just gets filtered out. So this is overflow proteinuria. So these are the main mechanism by which we can actually have proteinuria. If there is any glomerular defect, if there is any tubular defect, or in case of intermittent proteinuria, now come to the postural proteinuria, orthostatic proteinuria that we were talking about. So supposing a child or any adult, the mechanism remains same. If it keeps standing for a long time, what happens? There is decrease in venous return, there is decrease in cardiac output, which results in increase in renin and increase angiotensin. So what happens whenever there's filtration from the glomerulus, you actually see efferent arteriole is the one that flows the blood inside the glomerulus, and it gets filtered from the glomerulus and goes out through the efferent arteriole. So once there is increase in renin and angiotensin, what happens is there's constriction of the efferent arteriole, and because of this constriction, there's increase in filtration of the protein which moves out of the tubules, and that is why there is postural proteinuria, orthostatic proteinuria we can actually see. So orthostatic proteinuria, it is very easy to rule it out, and the reason why we always emphasize for the first morning protein is because to rule out orthostatic proteinuria by itself. Supposing we have some number of cases after that, a couple of cases. We have one of orthostatic proteinuria which will make it more clearer. But the make
Neha, you keep your mic closer. Your voice is breaking in between.
okay, I'll just a minute. I'll use
Very.
I think you can't. Is it now? Is it clear?
Yeah, your earphones. Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so we would go about it. So when we were already discussing about the intermittent proteinuria, transient proteinuria, we have already discussed, which is in case of any infections, fever, or dehydration or exercise. Then another point that we discussed about orthostatic proteinuria, in which how orthostatic proteinuria occurs because of increasing standing for a longer period of time. So whenever we do a urine protein creatinine ratio or a urine dipstick during evenings, it may come positive. But once we do a morning sample, like just when the child has got up from bed, not exercised, not moved around, you will find there's no proteinuria. So this definitely rules out orthostatic proteinuria. Then persistent proteinuria, which is either glomerular or tubular, which we have already discussed in the last slide. So for this glomerular proteinuria, either it can be primary or it can be secondary. So primary podocytopathies can be there, like mostly nephrotics, or sometimes even in nephritic range you can get. So minimal change disease or rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis or membranous nephropathy or focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. These are all types of primary glomerulopathies. Then coming to secondary glomerulopathies, there can be proteinuria in connective tissue disorders like systemic lupus erythematosus, IgA nephropathies. Even in children with diabetes, there can be long-standing diabetes, and hypertension can also cause nephropathies. Coming on to tubular problems, tubular proteinuria, there can be hereditary causes or there can be acquired causes. Hereditary, we've already know that it is renal tubular acidosis. Then there can be various dense disease, Loeys syndrome. All these comes under hereditary problems of tubules, where there is increased filtration, they are unable to absorb, or there is increased filtration from the tubules. Then acquired causes. So acquired causes can be related to a lot of things, like there can be some drugs which can actually, acyclovir is one of the important drug which can cause tubular necrosis. Then there can be a lot of antibiotics which cause tubular problems, and there is which can result in acute kidney injury. Then pyelonephritis, interstitial nephritis, lot of reflux problems. You can see a child with a long-standing reflux, recurrent infections can actually have proteinuria. Then the poisoning like mercury, heavy metal poisoning, all these also can cause tubular proteinuria. So this is a brief about how proteinuria occurs. Then there can be various mechanisms, like there can be oxidative stress mechanisms because of which reactive oxygen metabolites may form. There can be various kinds of complement pathways that may be activated. There can be ischemic tubular damage. There can be obstruction in the tubules which can result in renal injury. Very important part in, I think, pediatric practice for us is history and clinical examination. So any child with coming with proteinuria, we really need to rule out whether it is nephrotic or nephritic proteinuria. If it is nephritic or nephrotic, we really need to investigate urgently and need to start treating the patient. So if there is any signs of renal failure, like edema is there, proteinuria is there, edema is there, hypertension is there, oligouria is there, then urgent admission and management is required. Lot of cases you find recurrent UTIs, reflux nephropathy. These things need to be taken a history and drug history, especially if the patient has been taking a lot of NSAIDs. They may have proteinuria. Family history of ADPKD, ARPKD is very important. You may just land up with a case of renal failure and suddenly you just take a history. There was one history of uncle having a dialysis and this child has hearing loss. So all these needs to be taken into account, especially if the other siblings have had some renal problems or there's some other family member who's having any renal problem. Examination wise, very important. Sometimes you just get a history of bedwetting in a child and you find that the child has growth failure and is already landed into CKD stage 4, stage 5. So growth failure, anemia, rickets, any bony deformities, hypertension, edema, joint pains, rashes, because rashes and joint pains are more like connective tissue disorder. I remember just few days back, I got a child who just had proteinuria and some active sediments, that is some pus cells in the urine. On probing the history of loss of 6 kgs in the last 6 months. That was the only history she said. But when I kept asking, she told me she has she has problem in the going to the sun. Then she has rashes. She has small joint pains. Her ANA came out to be positive. She turned out to be SLE, and she had hypothyroidism along with that. So we really need to take a good history and do a full clinical examination. Clinical examination, it is very important to examine the genitalia and the spine also, because a lot of time we find that the spina bifida may be there. There may be other spine problems. There may be neurogenic bladder associated, which we may miss. Then also anus examination. Then sometimes we may find palpable flank masses which are more towards ARPKD, because there may be a severe PUJ obstruction which has resulted in a gross hydronephrosis in a kidney. I actually found a child who had his bladder till abdomen because there was PUV and he had recurrent, cannot pass urine well. So there is recurrent obstruction. So we need to look out for all these things, whether if we can feel any bladder or any masses. In nephrotics, we generally find some ascites or some pleural effusion, maybe there along with pectin pedal edema or periorbital edema. Coming on to investigations, I hope I'm not very fast. If I'm fast, do you want me to slow down? Because I thought this is very basic stuff that we
Yeah,
are. Okay. So we continue with the same speed. So urine dipstick, when I say, it is one of something that we should have in our clinics because it's very easy to have. We just keep a dipstick bottle, ask the patient to pass urine and see the dipstick. So that dipstick, actually we can come to know the amount of protein that the child is passing. The main protein that we actually measure in a dipstick is only albumin, which is there. The other higher molecule, the other lower molecular weight proteins like gamma globulins are not seen in dipstick. So dipstick, what happens? The greenish color appearance from blue color is because of tetrahydro bromophenol. So whenever you dip it in a urine, it turns into color, which we actually see and we can measure. So if you can really see over here, there's protein and there's glucose. So we really don't need to see this glucose. We just need to see only the protein part. So if there is the dipstick would original color would be as negative. Once we dip it in urine, we will see the changes in the color. So it comes here as trace, which is between 15 to 30 milligram per deciliter, and then it comes +1, +2, +3. So correspondingly, we can see actually the amount of protein that is there. So I've already told till 150, it is not very significant. So till +1, we really need to be very sure whether it is proteinuria or not. But +2, +3, +4 are definitely very, very significant proteinuria is there. So this dipstick is something that we can do at our clinic, but it is important to take the result with a pinch of salt because there are a lot of times false positive or false negative reports which may be there along with the dipstick. So it should always be collaborated with a lab report. Sometimes you would find if the dipstick is kept uh, in the urine for a longer amount of time or exposed for a long amount of time, then it may give false positive results. If there is associated hematuria or there may be pus cells, then also it may be false positive. Even in very alkaline urine, it may come false positive. Even sometimes drugs, if the child is on antibiotics like cephalosporins, or if there is any contrast given to the child, they may result in false positive reports. Even false negative can be there, especially in acidic urine. If the urine specific gravity is very low, or if there is other type of proteins apart from albumin, then also it may come false negative. So for this to confirm, it's very important to do a quantitative assessment. So how do we do a quantitative assessment? There can be either a spot test, which is very good in younger children because it's very difficult to collect a 24-hour sample, especially if you don't catheterize a child. Catheterization is again a problem in such small children. So we just do a spot sample. So spot sample, if it is 2 years of age, then if it's less than 0.2, it is considered to be normal. Less than that, if it is more than 0.2, then it is definitely significant and we need to investigate the child further and do a 24 hours urine protein to know further the amount of proteinuria that is there. If it is less than 2 years, that is generally 6 months to 24 months, they are passing more amount of protein as compared to the older children. So the ratio is 0.5. If it is less than that or equal to 0.5, you don't do anything. If it is more than that, you definitely need to go for a 24 hours urine protein estimation and other tests that we need to do. So coming on to the most important three vital questions whenever we get a child with a proteinuria, whether it is persistent, transient or orthostatic. So orthostatic, you rule out, you do a first morning sample if the child has not done first morning sample. You rule out transient by asking for all the positive history about any infections or dehydration or fever. And now when you're really sure that it is persistent proteinuria, you go for further investigation. Then if it is persistent, whether it is nephrotic range, nephritic range, what range of proteinuria is there. If it is nephrotic, then you really need to act early. If it is nephritic also, then also you need to act early. Then what is the cause for this proteinuria? So these are the three questions that we really need to answer by the end of this presentation. Coming on to the cases, which is I think the most interesting part of the presentation. So this was a 15-year-old athletic boy who goes for a regular workout, and so they just go for a school checkup, and in that they did a dipstick. This is like a school screening analysis was done, and the dipstick showed protein was 2 plus. He was further investigated. Urine spot protein creatinine ratio was 0.5. This is a 15-year-old child. What next do you want to do for this child? I would like to hear from anyone. If anyone wants to participate. Okay, so for this child, as we have already discussed, since this was a school screening test, so what we went is we repeated it in the morning, the first urine sample, and actually the 8 a.m. urine sample, you can see that it came out to be 0.01 only, that is the 10 milligram millimole, which is 0.01, and at 4 p.m. it came out to be 0.5, which is again significant. So this child had orthostatic proteinuria, and we don't need to do anything else for this child. Coming on to the next case, this is a 1-year-old infant who had failure to thrive. Both height and weight were less than third percentile. This child had signs of rickets on examination. I'll just show you the picture. And when we took a deeper history, the father said that the child passes a lot of times urine, passes almost 12 times urine per day, 12 to 14 times. The urine dipstick, which was done in the hospital, only showed protein 3 plus and glucose 2 plus. Any guesses for this? Okay, so this was the child. So we can actually see this is a very malnourished child. We can see there's the signs of rickets here in this baby, and looks really malnourished. So this actually came out to be RTA, the proximal RTA, uh, renal tubular acidosis, because there was glucosuria, there was protein, there was sugar that was coming out, there was phosphaturia and hyperkalemia. Coming on to next case, so this was a 5-year-old boy who presented with puffy eyes, enlarged tummy, and there was facial swelling. On examination, the blood pressure was normal. There was ascites, there was pitting edema, there was slight amount of effusion which was there, and the urine protein was 4 plus. I think all of us can guess this is the case of nephrotic syndrome. Urine protein creatinine ratio was 1.5, which was in the nephrotic range, and urine serum albumin was 1.5, which is less than 2.5. So again, pointing towards nephrotic. Cholesterol was 378. So this was a case of nephrotic syndrome. All things point towards nephrotic. Now, this is, I think, the most important slide for the day, because this actually tells us how do we approach to a child with proteinuria. So whenever you get a child, you did a dipstick, it showed +1 proteinuria. So whenever there is +1, if there is only trace, I think you just need to repeat the dipstick again. But if there is +1 or more, then what you do is you repeat the morning sample. By this way, you are ruling out orthostatic proteinuria. Supposing if there is no protein, then you just need to follow up. But I would suggest you just repeat it once more in another 1 or 2 months, maybe, or 6 months. Repeat protein to just rule out orthostatic. So now, and you can actually confirm it by doing it twice, one in the morning and one in the evening. Supposing the first morning sample again shows urine dipstick, which is more than +1 more, then we really need to do a urine protein creatinine ratio, which we did, a spot urine protein creatinine ratio. Supposing if the spot protein creatinine ratio is again showing uh, protein is there, then we need to go and do a 24-hour urine protein analysis, which either we can do in an older child. They can actually take a bottle from the lab and collect it, but in younger child, even a spot sample is okay. Otherwise, you really need to catheterize the child. And also, whenever there's protein, do a urine analysis, the urine routine, to rule out hematuria in such cases, because you may get falsified report with a protein positive and there may be just a hematuria along with it. So do a urine analysis, do a 24 hours urine protein. I think there is some mistake in this slide. You just don't need to go for CBC RFT along with it. First of all, wait for a urine spot protein and urine analysis. Once you are done with it, if supposing it is all normal, then what you can do is, next step, supposing if it is all normal, the urine 24 hours and urine analysis, just follow up for the protein. Supposing if it is abnormal, then go for CBC RFT, urine culture, and renal ultrasound, which are like basic tests you need to do. If it is nephrotic range proteinuria, do a cholesterol and do a cholesterol along with it. Supposing if it is non-nephrotic range, then just do these basic investigations. Supposing if it comes, anything comes normal, there is hypertension, then always do for a low complement level ANA examination along with it. And if you find on renal ultrasound that the kidneys are not good, like there is hydronephrosis or they're small or dysplastic kidneys, that suggest of low GFR, or if there is any the kidney function is like there's deranged RFT, then in this case where you are suspecting an atypical case, you may need to plan for a renal biopsy. Even in cases where there is low GFR, like if it is less than 60 ml per minute and you really do not know the cause, like you have ruled out reflux nephropathy and everything, you may need a renal biopsy in such cases also. So and the last is about nephrotic syndrome. In this case you really need to do a cholesterol. If there is any hypertension or hematuria or any atypical features are there, you need to do complement levels and ANA also along. Okay. So what are the indications for a renal biopsy? If there is persistent proteinuria, that is more than 1 gram per day, according to body surface area. If there are active urinary sediments which are present, that is persistent hematuria is there, that is more than 6 months. So proteinuria unexplained for more than 3 months, hematuria more than 6 months, if there's persistently low C3 which is there, if there are any atypical features like suspicion of any connective tissue disorders, then you really need to do a kidney biopsy. If there is poor GFR, low GFR less than 16, there is no explanation for that GFR, the kidney size is all okay, you need to go and do a renal biopsy and see what's happening inside. One thing more I would like to put, if there is any tubular proteinuria then that you're suspecting, then beta gamma globulin you can actually find out how much is there, and if it is significant tubular proteinuria is there. Coming on to the treatment part. So the treatment, most important is the diagnosis in a case of proteinuria. When we talk about treatment, it is very important that we should not get overboard with a lot of high protein diet in a child. So we should always follow a dietary protein recommendation, because sometimes it may be very high protein that the child is getting. So we really need to cut down on that protein. Uh, if there is still proteinuria which is in non-nephrotic range, but it is persistent proteinuria, you do not have any other cause, then we would suggest to use anti-proteinuric drugs which have both, because they are not only just anti-proteinuric. So the two things that actually damage a kidney are hypertension and proteinuria. If you control both these things, maybe you can prolong the life of a kidney. If it's 10 years, maybe 20, 30 years. So this anti-proteinuric drugs have anti-fibrotic effects also. So what do I mean by anti-fibrotic effects is they prevent further kidney damage, not only kidney damage, but they are protective towards the heart also. So ACE inhibitors, that is angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors, or ARBs, these are the drug of choice. Sometimes if there is non-nephrotic proteinuria which is persisting, especially in case with chronic kidney disease, from stage 4 to stage depending upon stage 3B, we continue these ARBs and ACE inhibitors. After that, once the child is already stage 3B, then we really need to cut down on these ARBs and ACEs, because they will damage the kidney further. But they really help in controlling non-nephrotic range proteinuria. They help in prolonging the life of the kidneys. But it is very important that in newborn, in premature babies, in pregnancy, we should avoid giving ARBs and ACE inhibitors, because they may damage the kidney early. So very important, whenever we want to start ACE inhibitors or ARBs, we should wait till the baby is at least 6 months of age. Before that we cannot start, because they may result in renal arterial stenosis, so we don't want that. So no ARBs and ACE inhibitors in pregnancy or in premature infants before the age of 6 months, or even in infants before they reach 6 months. So that is something about proteinuria. I'm happy to have questions regarding it.
Thank you, Neha. Thanks for a very lucid details, and I think everybody must have understood what to do and what not to do.
So if any questions, please.
Questions?
Yeah. one question is there.
Okay.
I mean, it has been asked by one of the viewers,
Okay.
how to do 24-hour urinary protein oblique creatinine ratio.
Okay. So if you want to do a 24 hours, see, there are two things.
I
One is,
think it's not done usually.
okay. So if you want to do 24 hours protein is very easy to do. But what we generally do for 24 hours, if you want to do creatinine also, then you actually have to give a blood sample of blood creatinine, because they will do a creatinine clearance test. So you need to give a 24 hours urine protein, then they will do a blood test in which they will give you a blood serum creatinine, and then from that they would take out the creatinine clearance. So that will actually give you, it's a very beautiful test if it's done with the blood test. So you can actually have 24 hours urine protein, they will give you 24 hours urine microalbumin, and then they will give you 24 hours creatinine clearance, which again you can consider when you take all the reports together. So if you want to do in a very small child, even if you miss one sample of urine, it is not significant, the 24-hour sample. So it is very important, like less than 6 years of age, because it's very difficult to collect, you catheterize and you do it.
But what I feel actually, in the children, whether it is just 24